It's genuinely staggering to think about.
What's that?
A modern $40,000 AI GPU spends up to half of its operating life doing absolutely nothing.
Oh, yeah. Literally just sitting there.
Exactly. It is sitting completely idle, burning through massive amounts of power, just, waiting for data to arrive. I mean, everyone is completely obsessed with the processing power like the brains of the operation, while entirely ignoring the central nervous system.
Right, which is a massive oversight.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking you right into the mechanics of the next massive bottleneck in the AI boom.
Because honestly, when you look at an infrastructure where cluster costs run into the billions of dollars, an idle GPU isn't just a minor inefficiency, it is a catastrophic financial leak.
Yeah, totally.
The industry is basically hitting a physical wall where compute is no longer the primary constraint, it's data movement.
And that data movement constraint is exactly why we are synthesizing a massive and frankly highly contradictory stack of materials for you today.
Oh, it's definitely contradictory.
Right. So we're looking at the Q2 fiscal year 2026 earnings call from a company called Penguin Solutions. We're layering that with some really deep dive financial analysis from the Gaetano and Nine Venture Substacks.
Both excellent sources, yeah.
Yeah, they really go into the weeds. We are also pulling technical specs from Marvell's multi-billion-dollar acquisition presentation on Celestial AI. And to see how the market is violently reacting to all of this.
And it is violent.
Very. We are analyzing the fiercely debated retail trading narratives happening right now on Reddit forums, specifically Yarn Deep Fucking Value and Zur Small Street Bets.
It is such a volatile mix of information. I mean, you have highly dense, forward-looking semiconductor physics colliding directly with retail traders hunting for a rapid short squeeze.
It's wild to watch.
It is. But before we dig into the architecture, we really need to establish the ground rules for today's analysis. We are not here to recommend stocks, and we aren't taking sides in a trading war.
Right. Definitely not financial advice.
Exactly. Our objective is to impartially deconstruct these conflicting financial narratives so you can understand the underlying technology shift.
Okay, let's unpack this shift. If GPUs are the undisputed brains of AI, why are we suddenly pivoting away from the processor to obsess over the physical plumbing that surrounds it?
Well, the pivot is happening because the fundamental architecture of artificial intelligence is transitioning. We're moving from the training phase to the inference and agentic phase.
Okay, and those need different hardware.
Structurally opposed hardware requirements, actually. Training a foundational model is entirely compute-bound. You are essentially brute-forcing the entire internet into a neural network.
Which takes massive power.
Right. It demands raw parallel processing muscle. But inference, which is actually querying that model to generate net new outputs, flips the architecture completely. It becomes memory-bound and hypersensitive to latency.
Kashak, the CEO of Penguin Solutions, used an analogy in their earnings call that I think illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, the book analogy. I like that one.
Yeah. He said training a model is like writing a massive encyclopedic book. It takes months of heavy lifting. But inference is like writing the next sentence of that book.
Which cuts right to the mechanics of autoregressive generation.
Autoregressive meaning it predicts the next word.
Precisely. When an AI generates text, it predicts the next word based on everything that came before it. And that context is stored in what the industry calls the key value cache, or KV cache.
Got it.
So as your context window scales, say, going from a few paragraphs to entire code bases or massive legal briefs, that KV cache just explodes in size.
Meaning if the memory infrastructure isn't fast enough to feed that context back into the GPU instantly, the GPU basically has to reread the entire book just to spit out the next word.
Yes. And that rereading is the exact latency you experience when an AI assistant stalls or hangs. The memory capacity and the bandwidth required to retrieve that context dictate the speed of the entire system.
I actually found this really quirky analogy in one of the Substack sources that I have to share.
Oh, lay it on me.
Okay, think of the AI data center as a giant penguin colony. The GPUs are the penguins, and they're working furiously. The memory is the fish they need to eat.
Okay, I'm following.
If the penguins have to waddle too far to get the fish, their processing speed doesn't matter. They're starving. They need a giant fish warehouse right next to them.
That's surprisingly accurate, and it's exactly why memory AI and these KV caches are becoming critical for enterprise scale AI. If you are listening to this and wondering why your AI assistant is sometimes slow or loses context, this physical bottleneck is exactly why.
Which brings us directly to Penguin Solutions ticker symbol PETAC. They are aggressively positioning themselves to be the ones building that fish warehouse.
Or as they call it, an AI factory platform.
Right, yeah. They're pivoting away from being a legacy systems integrator. But man, when you look at their Q2 reality check, there is a stark, almost brutal contrast between their vision of being the ultimate AI architect and their current financial spreadsheets.
Yeah, the transition is, well, it's messy. If you look at their Q2 fiscal year 2026 numbers, total revenue came in at $343 million,
Which is down, right?
down 6% year over year. But that top-line number masks a profound structural shift happening beneath the surface between their three business segments.
Right, the advanced computing, integrated memory, and optimized LED.
Exactly, though they are heavily deprioritizing the LEB segment.
Okay, here's where the numbers get genuinely confusing for anyone trying to, value the company. Their advanced computing segment dropped by 42%.
A massive drop.
But simultaneously, their integrated memory segment surged by 63%, hitting $172 million. So if Penguin is supposed to be building the critical computing infrastructure for the next generation of AI, a 42% drop in their core computing segment looks catastrophic on paper. I mean, are they bleeding out, or is this intentional surgery?
The financial filings indicate it is highly intentional surgery, though obviously it carries significant short-term pain.
What are they cutting out?
Management is deliberately shedding their legacy hyperscaler hardware concentration. Historically, serving hyperscalers like Meta or Google is a massive volume game. But the margins are razor thin because those tech giants dictate the terms.
And they often just build their own white box servers anyway.
Exactly. So stepping away from that hyperscaler business created a massive 30 percentage point unfavorable impact on that segment's growth.
Wow, 30%. And they're also winding down the legacy Penguin Edge business, right?
Yes, to focus entirely on higher margin enterprise and sovereign AI customers. But that strategic shift introduces a massive timing lag.
Because hardware moves slower than software.
Brutally slow timelines, yeah. A booking today won't hit the revenue sheet for 3 to 6 months. And for these massive liquid-cooled AI cluster deployments, you are looking at a 12 to 18-month cycle from the initial contract handshake to the system actually processing tokens.
So the revenue we are looking at in Q2 is just a lagging indicator of decisions they made over a year ago.
Precisely. The leading indicators are what the bulls are pointing to. The non-hyperscale AI and high-performance computing segment, which is the exact target of their pivot, grew by 50% year over year.
And they're landing some pretty significant enterprise deployments, too. Like they're building out voice AI infrastructure for DeepGram using Dell and NVIDIA Blackwell hardware.
And orchestrating massive research clusters for Georgia Tech.
But wait, the most critical leading indicator has to be their strategic alliance in South Korea, right?
Oh, absolutely. SK Telecom took a $200 million stake in Penguin. They hold 6 million shares now, and they are actively deploying sovereign AI factories like the Hain facility in South Korea.
And a crucial layer here for you listening is that SK Telecom is part of the same conglomerate as SK Hynix.
Which is huge. SK Hynix is one of the undisputed leaders in manufacturing high bandwidth memory, or HBM.
And HBM is practically gold right now.
It really is. In a global market where memory supply is severely constrained, having a direct pipeline to SK Hynix is a colossal competitive moat. Penguin is essentially weaponizing that 63% growth in memory to subsidize the painful architectural overhaul of their computing segment.
Okay, so let's look at the actual physics of bridging this data bottleneck. How do they physically connect these massive pools of memory to the GPUs?
We need to look at it in two phases. The immediate solution rolling out today, and the theoretical physics the market is betting on for tomorrow.
Okay, let's start with today.
The immediate short-term architecture relies on CXL, or Compute Express Link. This protocol enables electrical memory pooling.
Electrical memory pooling, what does that mean practically?
So instead of DRAM being hard-locked to a specific processor where it can't be shared, CXL standardizes the protocol over the PCIe lanes. It allows multiple CPUs and GPUs to access a massive shared pool of memory as if it were local to them.
Wait, electrical memory pooling sounds incredible in theory. But how do they handle the inherent latency? I mean, if you decouple the DRAM from the processor and force the data to travel across the server rack, Aren't you just moving the bottleneck to the PCIe bus?
You are identifying the exact engineering hurdle of CXL. But the protocol maintains cache coherency, which ensures every processor sees the same updated data simultaneously. That mitigates a huge amount of the software overhead.
Okay, so it's smart about how it shares the data.
Right. And Penguin just commercialized a Memory AI KV cache server supporting up to 11 terabytes of CXL-based memory. They've already deployed it to a Tier 1 financial institution, so they are actively generating revenue by maximizing the efficiency of copper electrical pathways.
But even with CXL optimizing the protocol, copper itself has a hard physical ceiling, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does.
And that constraint brings us to the long-term solution the market is just absolutely obsessed with right now, the Photonic Memory Appliance, or PMA.
Moving data with light instead of electricity.
Exactly. So if CXL is like building a fast bullet train between the CPU and the memory, photonics is basically teleportation.
That's a great way to put it.
And Marvell just validated this entire sector by acquiring Celestial AI, which is a pioneer in photonic fabrics that Penguin actually invested in early, for $3.25 billion up front, plus up to $2.25 billion in performance earnouts by 2029.
It's a massive bet. And the physics of the Celestial AI acquisition illustrate exactly why copper is failing. When you push high-frequency electrical signals through copper wiring, you encounter severe insertion loss and impedance.
It gets hot, right?
Extremely hot. The electrical resistance generates massive amounts of friction, which translates into heat. To push data further and faster over copper, you need retimers and heavy cooling, and that consumes massive amounts of your power budget.
But light completely bypasses that electrical resistance.
Precisely. Silicon photonics transmit data via lasers over fiber optic pathways. Celestial's fabric allows for a 50-meter reach with massive bandwidth and ultra-low latency. We are talking less than 150 nanoseconds.
That is incomprehensibly fast.
It is. But the defining metric is thermal efficiency. It requires only 2.5 picojoules per bit of data moved. You completely eliminate the thermal nightmare of electrical friction.
Okay, but a 50-meter photonic reach creates a totally new problem: integration. And that brings us directly to why retail traders on small street bets are aggressively debating the current supply chain.
The clash between the retail hype and the sober reality of hardware manufacturing here is intense.
Very intense. Let's look at the bull case first. Heavily promoted on Bureau Deep Fucking Value and various substacks. They're focusing on the deep value multiple.
Right, Penguin is trading at roughly 1.5 to 1.7 times forward sales, sitting at around a $2.6 billion market cap.
Which, for a company positioned at the center of the AI memory bottleneck, bulls argue it is drastically undervalued, especially when you factor in the short interest.
The short interest is high.
Really high. There are 8.52 million shares shorted, which is roughly 17 to 18% of the float. The bulls are anticipating a super microcomputer or SMCI-style re-rating. They believe the broader market still views Penguin as a boring legacy systems integrator and just hasn't priced in their transition to this AI factory platform orchestrating photonic memory.
They're hunting for a massive short squeeze.
Exactly. But what's the reality check here?
Well, the bear thesis, which was articulated quite sharply in the 9 Ventures Substack analysis, argues that retail traders are dangerously conflating different layers of the semiconductor supply chain.
How so?
The market is screaming about the revolutionary potential of the photonic memory appliance without actually understanding who captures the margin.
Oh, because Penguin doesn't own the tech.
Exactly. The reality is that Penguin does not own the foundational high-margin photonic intellectual property. Marvell and Celestial AI own the IP for the lasers and the silicon photonics.
So what is Penguin actually building?
Penguin is the company building the 2U box, the metal chassis inside the server rack that the photonic appliance sits inside. Furthermore, this tech isn't expected to hit commercial launch until 2027.
It isn't even fully in the qualification stage yet.
Right. So the bears argue that pricing Penguin as if they own the core optical IP is a fundamental misunderstanding of hardware economics.
So what does this all mean for you as an investor or tech watcher? If Penguin is just building the metal box that holds Marvell's magical light lasers, are the retail traders completely delusional for expecting a massive payout?
What's fascinating here is that the value isn't zero just because they don't own the lasers. The value lies in the sheer complexity of co-packaged optics.
Right.
One of the traders on Small Street Bets actually nailed the engineering reality perfectly. Scaling photonics isn't about fabricating one magic chip. It is an orchestration nightmare.
Because everything has to align perfectly.
Right. You have to handle incredibly fragile fiber alignments, manage microscopic thermal budgets so the lasers don't degrade, and get the entire rack to yield without a high failure rate.
It's the integration.
Yes, integration is the hardest part of the bottleneck. Being the company that successfully builds the chassis, manages those intense fluid cooling loops, and provides the cluster management software like Penguin's Clusterware is highly valuable.
So the orchestrator captures value by making the ecosystem functional.
Absolutely. However, expecting an integrator to command the 60+% gross margins of a core fabless IP owner like Marvell is mathematically impossible. The value is absolutely there, but the valuation multiple dictates a very different financial reality.
Okay, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. Let's just recap how these pieces fit together.
Sure.
We started with the fundamental architectural shift from training models to running inference, which flipped the AI bottleneck from a compute problem to a memory and latency problem. The GPUs are starving for context, and the data simply cannot move fast enough.
And then we analyze Penguin Solutions' aggressive, somewhat painful pivot to address this data starvation. They are intentionally shedding low-margin hyperscaler revenue, resulting in a 42% drop in computing.
But they're relying on a 63% surge in their integrated memory division, which is backed by SK Hynix, to fund their transition into an AI factory platform.
Right. And we looked at the actual hardware bridging the gap, maximizing copper efficiency today with CXL electrical pooling while preparing for the 2027 rollout of photonic memory appliances.
Moving data with light to bypass thermal resistance. And finally, we weighed the market dynamics. The intense friction between a retail-driven short-squeeze narrative relying on deep value multiples versus the sober reality that systems integrators operate on fundamentally different margin structures than the companies owning the core photonic IP.
Whether you are an investor, a network engineer dealing with co-packaged optics, or simply a user wondering why your AI tool is lagging, understanding the physical limitations of data movement is critical.
Absolutely.
You have to look past the processing chips and understand the nervous system to see where the entire technology stack is being forced to adapt. The constraints of physics will ultimately dictate the flow of capital.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to ponder. We have spent this entire deep dive analyzing the shift away from the actual processing chips toward the physical plumbing that keeps them fed with data. The copper cabling, the fiber optics, the liquid cooling loops, the orchestration software.
Physical infrastructure?
Exactly. So if the ultimate value in the next decade of artificial intelligence is truly shifting away from the brain and toward the physical plumbing, how long until the legacy telecom and data center hardware companies, the ones we currently write off as boring, slow-move utilities, become the absolute most powerful tech giants on the planet?
It's a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. Finding the future of this industry isn't about looking for a clean, binary answer. It's about being willing to wade into the architecture and figure out how the plumbing actually works. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.